And there have been these images that have been circling around on Facebook.
Or you mean the one that with the police escorting me?
So there's a photo. I'll try to figure out a way to put a picture somewhere on the screen. But it's a picture of you being detained by police. Obviously, it's a deep fake lah.
I mean, in a world where AI is there and data we are full of inundated data. I mean, I think the key question that we have to ask is,
Welcome to the Game of Impossible podcast. My name is Leon. This is my dad, Idris Jala. We are a father and son podcast where we discuss all things transformation through the lens of business, leadership, sport, and faith. We've just completed an 8-part series on your 8-step methodology. You can refer to that in the playlist on our YouTube channel where all of those episodes are consolidated. But today we're going back to our regular format. And I thought, it would be good to, since we've had a very set agenda for the last few episodes, I thought maybe it would be good to do a bit more of a casual check-in.
Okay.
We've not really caught up. It's been a busy couple of weeks for the both of us. You've just come back from Miri. You were in Miri last week.
yes, right.
Tell us about that.
Miri. Well, I went to Miri to attend a cousin's wedding. It was really nice. It was partly tribal and partly modern as well. It was a wedding by the beach. It was wonderful.
Partly tribal, maybe for those who are unaware of the context, what do you mean by tribal?
Yeah,
why tribal?
Yeah, tribal. My cousin is Kalabit, obviously, the tribe, Kalabit tribe. And the wife, is from the Bidayu tribe. So there were two infusion of the Bidayu tribal wedding plus the Kalabit wedding inside there. And so because it was in a modern setting, so it's a modern wedding is also infused into it. And it's not in the traditional longhouse setting. It's not even in the church. It was at the beach. But it's really nice, actually.
Yeah. And what have you been up to since you've come back?
Well, I spent a lot of time at the farm, still doing the pheasants. They're growing really well.
How's that going?
That's doing really well. And I also found out there was this young guy, a Malay chap, that figured out how to transition to convert the siakap, which are barramundi, from brackish water to become fresh water. So I've now got them in the pond. So what he's basically done...
How do you do that?
So what he's done is he got the barramundi, which is we call siakap here. So every month he reduces the salinity of the water. So he reduces it over a month, over a year period with all the salinity reduced. Then it becomes 100% fresh. When they bear, they lay eggs and then the fry starts coming, they're 100% fresh water. So I now have bought 500 of the fries. I put them in a small cage in my pond so that they can feed well. And I tried it before, and so it's successfully done. So I've now gone for 500. So I spent a lot of time at the farm doing this. It's really good fun doing it. And Mom and I were in Singapore recently to attend Trevor Noah's comedy show. It was really funny. It was really very, very funny. Because the setting was in Singapore, he took the Mickey out of the Singaporeans. He says the Singaporeans have so many rules for everything. And he said when he stepped outside the building, and there's a designated place for you to smoke. It's in the yellow box area. He said they are so obedient in Singapore, even the smoke stays within the yellow box. So he got everybody in stitches over 1.5 hours. He's one of the best in the business.
It's very funny you mentioned that because it's quite in line with, before recording today's podcast, we loosely talked about the paradox of efficiency.
Right.
And this example that you've given, and I'm not saying that Singapore is guilty of this, but since we all know Singapore is a very efficient country, so since we're on the topic of efficiency, it's a great segue into the topic actually. And I promise this was not scripted. We did not pre-agree to talk about Singapore first and your Trevor Noah show, but it is something that I think a lot of organizations and teams are thinking about right now in the age of generative AI, in a world where we are trying to optimize for everything. I think there are so many wins in that. I mean, the fact that we're able to do this podcast just as a two-man show is thanks to technologies like AI to be able to optimize for us. But it also has gotten me to think, can there be a point at which an overemphasis on efficiency actually becomes a bane for an organization or becomes a barrier for innovation?
I do believe there is a point when it becomes a problem. But before that, I would say that it's important to embrace technology. I do believe there's tremendous opportunity for embracing it. And then you can continue to be innovative and you continue to grow as well together with it. So you shouldn't be scared of technology. But having said that, there is a point when, if you're not careful, it becomes problematic. So, to use the word efficiency, if you're so dogmatic about certain things you intend to do, and then people stop being creative, stop thinking outside the box. The rules of the game that is set out there, if you stick to the same rules of the game and you're optimizing of the same rules, actually, sometimes you have to address the entire rule itself need to be changed. And that is the problem where I think if you don't re-examine the nature of the game itself has reached an optimum point. The game is no longer bringing you to the next level. And I can give you a real example. A real example would be, I'm a fan of Chelsea Football Club. When Boli and Clear Lake Capital bought the club from Abramovich, it's a club that has won many, many titles during that period. And I know for a fact that Boli and these guys, they're really using data to determine who they buy, which players they purchase. In 2 years since they took over, they spent a whopping £1 billion buying players. It's the largest capital outlay that we've seen in a short period of time. But with that, they were using technology, looking at data, the successful dribbles that you make, and the kicks, the number of goals you score, all those data is on their fingertips. And they're using this to inform the kind of price they are willing to pay for players. But what they forgot, what in reality today is this. That does not give you the assurance that with those statistics that those people obtain in the league that where they play, let's say in Bundesliga or Bundrik that we bought from Ukraine, from Shakhtar, that this guy will actually be able to have the same kind of output in the Premier League. Obviously, it's very different. It's a very fast game in the Premier League, and the defenders are very robust and physical. So the data that you have in different area, different league, doesn't presupposes that they are going to be as good in here. That's where the human intervention need to come in. So people must look at the data as the basis, but you must have to be able to really examine how do these people fare when they play outside. So I think it's important for people to say that when the team, where they are in the Bundesliga, play in the international area, how do they fare? Those are more important statistics. To be clear, after spending £1 billion buying those players, we dropped to number 12 in our first season. And in that period, in 2-year period, we changed out 5 managers. This is quite incredible. And so in the second year, we were able to move from number 12 to number 6. But even at number 6, that would have been totally unacceptable in the Abramovich era. So I can tell you, over-reliance on data and statistics, over-reliance on AI that's available there without the human intervention can completely derail. So I think it's important to use the data, sure, as a basis, but the human intellect, the intervention that's required to make adaptation and intelligent use of the data is very important.
Yeah. There's 2 parts to it. What you have shared is an example where too much data can perhaps make you over-reliant on the data and therefore a bit maybe trigger happy in some of your decisions because the data says so, therefore I will blindly trust the data without regard for the human elements, as you say, and other nuances that need to be taken into consideration. But on the other hand, I think also data can, there's this quote from Edward Tenner who wrote a book called The Efficiency Paradox, which I started to read recently. And he says that more data isn't always better. It can actually lead to greater inefficiencies. And I think That is certainly true, because I have personally found, in my experience, sometimes there can be a tendency for too much data to then give you a bit of paralysis by analysis.
Yeah, sure.
Because you have so much at your fingertips. Now you're stuck
Become
with, okay,
very
what do I go with? So it can also lead to inaction
Yeah.
too. I don't know. Have you maybe experienced or seen this play out in other teams or other organizations where the flip side is true? Too much data being the cause for inaction.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, when we were doing doing our in Malaysia Airlines, we look at the individual flights P&L. You can be really lost with that data, and when we examined it, if you don't know how to look at data and say what are the core part of the data that's really relevant for decision making, you then get completely lost. This is where it's important. For example, if we have a flight, if a flight is losing money, revenue minus direct cost, that means the cost directly related to flying that plane, you're losing money there, you should think about radically changing the price. If you cannot change the price, you should get rid of that flight. But if the flight is actually positive at direct cost but still losing money at overhead, that means take all costs, you're still losing money. If you get rid of those flights, even the other flights, if you got a lot of problem by getting, that means your overhead is going to lumber on the other flights, you may lose money. So there should be intelligent way for people have to use the data in a manner that makes common sense. So you have to put a cool towel on the data and don't get confused. And that is very important. So that's where the human intervention need to come in, the intellect need to come in and say, I don't actually entirely agree with this. So in Malaysia Airlines, we have a system that determines pricing, dynamic pricing. And so we tell everybody there's an override in that pricing model. The override means the data informs you this is the price that I need to put for this seat, for this hour. But the manager who thinks differently, I look at the other data, competitors' data, I see the data that's coming out there intelligently, what's happening when I looked at what the competitors are doing, you can override it. But if people are lazy, they don't think deeply about it, if they never use the override model, they just take everything that's recommended by the system, then you are running an entire airline robotic. So I think in business, it's just like playing a game of football. So if you want to play a game of football, it's exactly the same thing. If you play against a team and you know how they're going to play against Pep Guardiola team, they are possession football. You know exactly what they did. I mean, the last game that was played at the FA Cup, Man U beat them because it was very clear that Ten Hag employed a tactic that's counter-attack. He allowed Man City to possess the ball. All of them dropped to their side. They were parking the bus, but they knew on a counter-attack, they put the guys who are really fast runners to intercept them, and in the transition, then they occupied and scored the goals. It is very simple. So they actually beat Man City.
Yeah.
It is the best team without hands down. But it's a tactical game that's being played here. So when you analyze how you're going to beat an opponent, you must analyze the game that they're going to play and adjust the way you play. But if you tried to play a possession football, if Man U tried to do that, hands down, they would have been beaten. So you have to adjust it.
Yeah. So I mean, like you were, I think going back to the example that you gave of Malaysia Airlines.
Yeah.
An example of a company basically in the service industry. I think that's a good point to note, because you mentioned not wanting to be overly transactional in the way that you operate, in the way that you make decision making, but actually that will also translate to the way that you serve your customers.
Sure.
Whether you're a business, or in our case, we are a church, so we're not serving customers, but we are essentially serving our community. And I have found this to be the case because part of my job at the church that I work for is I oversee our online platforms, our online campuses. And so naturally, I also rely quite heavily on data and
sure.
some of those, if you like,
Analytics.
performance metrics. And I have found that I think one of the challenges that I experienced when I came from corporate into church ministry is in this environment, you are kind of forced to not be overly reliant on data and on strategies, because in this context, we are also having to remember that we are serving the needs of a community, which may be at odds with maybe what the data suggests is needed purely from a strategy standpoint of what is going to get the most engagement. So if the data tells us that people are looking to be entertained, and that is the metric for performance. If we were to blindly apply that, yes, that might be the case for some, but if we maybe look at the needs of our current congregation, and perhaps we are in a season where maybe people are feeling a bit down, and actually they don't need to be entertained, but they merely want the church to be able to acknowledge their pain, acknowledge their suffering, and then provide helpful tools for them to navigate it. Then sometimes that would mean, and this has been the case for us in the past, especially when I joined during the pandemic, that we had to make some calls to say, well, the data tells us that if we were to produce content that is entertaining, obviously that is going to get more traction. But is it answering the needs of the congregation? Probably not.
Good point.
And so we had to make some calls to shift. And obviously in doing that, what we found was that our numbers went down. We saw that our following online started to stagnate a little bit. But it goes back to, we talk a lot about being very clear on what your true north is. So our true north was, well, in this season, we're not interested in growth. We're not interested in vanity metrics, as we say, but we're interested in pastoring our online community. So we said, okay, if our goal is to pastor the community and we're not excited, if we're not going to focus on growth, then what should that performance metric be? Because we still need to be able to track it. So we figured, okay, if people feel that the content we put out is useful to them, then actually the metric isn't simply a like, because that is a passive engagement. We figured that actually what we need to encourage people to do, or maybe that the indication that people are finding this content useful, is if people are saving it, or if people are sharing it with someone else, because that shows that they are wholeheartedly engaging with the content. So we made a very intentional decision to say we're not going to look at following, we're not going to look at likes, we are only going to focus on quality engagement, i.e. shares and saves. Which meant that I could still continue to encourage the team to say, look, I know our following is not really growing, but let's remember to look at the shares and the saves, which were increasing. And then oddly enough, as a byproduct of that, over time, as that started to compound, then that translated back into following. Because what happens when more people share, then naturally your content is going to get higher reach. And as people save it as well, then that is bumped up the algorithm because it's being recognized as content that people find useful. So sometimes there is a need to kind of take a step back in order to then take two steps forward. But sometimes it can be hard when you're going through it, because you may not necessarily get the immediate gratification of making some of those perhaps slightly more left field, seemingly inefficient or suboptimal decisions. How do you personally navigate that sort of thing in your experience?
I think it's useful to think about this in two ways, two measures only, not even three. You think about one measure called efficiency measurement. And that could be, as you describe it, measures like the number of people that come to church, number of people that click their online services, and how long they do. Those are measures that measures efficiency. And another one is effectiveness measures. So in church, the effectiveness measures centers around spirituality. Do people really grow into the likeness of Christ? And these are very subjective. So I do believe that as regards the efficiency measures, you can get a lot of that based on data that's available, that instantaneous. But it's very difficult to measure the spirituality side of it, the effectiveness side of it, using that kind of data gathering. But you can do this maybe once in a few years, once in a year, once in maybe 3 or 4 years or 5 years. You do a very big survey of all the people that come to your church, and the survey can be 2 forms. One is a quantitative survey, and that means they answer questions quantitatively and very specific on what their opinions are on a few things that relating to spirituality. Then another one is an interview. So this is, you don't have the numbers that's people there. You really have to go down, people who are qualified in doing proper interviews on spirituality and really delve into it. Why do you do that? Because the quantitative and the qualitative input that is given will inform the paradox, the quandary that you refer to. As you want to make the shifts, do you have to ask the question, you're going to make some of the shift. I'm going to deliberately be prepared to drop the growth in the efficiency numbers because I'm going to focus a lot more on the spirituality, which is the measures of effectiveness. Is the church effective in growing people into the likeness of Christ, growing them in terms of spirituality? And that is not an easy thing to do, but it's quite a very decidedly, maybe once in 3 years and 5 years you do that. Why is that important? Because when you make strategic decisions as a church to shift from one to another in your strategy, you really have to be clear why you're doing, because there will be trade-offs. These trade-offs is very important. And I think it's very, very important. So I would say the same thing about, about any business. Any business, if you just want to focus on the current business and then milking, we call the cash cows, making the most of what is available there, but you don't think about breakthrough, and you don't see the changes in the business environment. The competitors are moving into a totally new game. The future is changing so fast, and before long, you become so good at what you do today, but the game has changed. And before long, you realize that you completely outperform and eventually become irrelevant. And that's why you've seen companies like Kodak and all, they disappeared because they never reinvented themselves. They were efficient at doing what they were doing, but they never realized that the world is changing so fast. Innovation is key. But to do that, it requires a cool towel on the head. You really have to really examine this properly. That's why I say you can't do these changes every now and then, because you'd have to get real data, both qualitative, quantitative. Your church is a good example. So to be clear, to summarize, 2 key measures. One is efficiency measures on True North. The other one is effectiveness. The effectiveness measures. Those 2 things you need to make the trade-off between them. And if you don't have the right trade-off, it's difficult to make the strategic change in leadership. But I can tell you there's a lot we can talk about future-proofing businesses and countries and economy, because these are critical, because the world is changing so fast. So there are a lot that one can do to future-proof your business and future-proof your government as well.
This Tim Harford, he said that the most creative and innovative ideas often come from the least efficient processes.
Yeah, absolutely.
How do you hold that intention? I mean, you have also spoken about the importance of time to reflect.
Yeah.
In leadership, to be effective, that of course you need to be efficient, but you also need to create that space for reflection. And that's actually what truly sets a leader apart from others. It's their ability to have a degree of self-reflection, introspection, because out of that comes real kind of deep insight into the work that you do. How do you personally make space for that? And then maybe can you give us examples of how this has looked like for you, both in a more kind of startup situation? I would say that the current PEMANDU Associates sort of is still functioning a little bit like a startup. We're still a fairly nimble, small company. But then you've also been in a large corporation, in a GLC like MAS, for example.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, let me talk about personally. I mean, my personal view is that leadership, people who stop growing, stop learning, they are already consigning themselves to pursue a road of mediocrity. So personally, I spend a lot of time watching videos on YouTube today. And I used to spend a lot of time reading books and material. I find there's a lot of material now that you can really, high quality material available on YouTube on all sorts of topics. Coming back to reflection, I was very busy. Today, I'm on a whole year of sabbatical. I have a lot of time to reflect. And what I listen to on YouTube, and if I thought that the comments that the person put on YouTube were questionable, and perhaps full of BS, because I didn't have time to research on it, to think about it, and I kind of felt that they were not quite grounded before, so I didn't have a clear view that that was the case. But today I got time to reflect on it. So I'm a lot sharper at thinking at alternative views that are there. So this period of 1 year, I have learned so much in the short period of time since I started the sabbatical, because I've watched so many things on religion. I studied a lot more about Islam, about other religion as well, not just Christianity, and see the origins of the Quran and the various versions that's available, and how did they deal with it. Just like we do it in Christianity, we have the canonicity of the Bible, how they are pulled together, and other religion too, Buddhism and others, the debates between the various protagonists, and all those I've watched them. And a lot of philosophers as well. Very interesting when you start doing. I've studied a lot more on what's happening in Israel and Palestine because of current affairs. I studied of the origins of the conflict in Ukraine as well as Russia today. I'm a lot more aware of the history behind it, all the problems that culminated into the current conflicts today than I did before. But the social media doesn't take it. But I think in leadership, you must be prepared to learn and keep on learning. And if you stop learning, that's a problem. And I think most of the time, the most learning that you can take is from reflection time. And if you learn by absorbing and just absorbing like a sponge, and you don't reflect on it, you cannot then distinguish between an opinion that is not based on facts, that's not grounded in reality, but just an opinion. And so you really have to reflect on what you think is right. But looking at the older alternative, but you have to have time to do all this. And to me, it was a wonderful learning for me is that I've been learning so much during the period of my reflection time, this period of few months.
Yeah, I mean, like some of these things. An example is I remember when I was doing my degree in theology.
Yeah.
You know, some of my best essays were the byproduct of a period of preparation where I was not entirely focused on the necessary texts directly pertaining to the question. A lot of the best essays, if I were to reflect back on how I prepared for them, I allowed myself to be kind of detoured into reading other materials. So you would think, okay, if I were to optimize writing a theology essay, on Christian theology, then wouldn't it be a more optimal use of time to allocate that 2 hours of reading purely to reading texts directly on the question and Christian texts at that?
Sure.
But I found myself becoming very interested in going down this big rabbit hole of reading other things, Islamic texts, even reading up on and really getting into some of the key arguments from very renowned atheists as well. And I found that while I was doing that, I felt kind of guilty because I said, well, I'm not really making the best use of my time because I need to get through these texts. These are the set texts which I know are directly going to help me with my essay. But I'm also really fascinated by this other stuff.
Yeah.
But then in the end, the what seemed like a trade-off in terms of efficiency, it paid off because ultimately you're then able to approach once you return to the task at hand, you're now able to approach it with that much more nuance and complexity of thought because you've also weighed up what other people are saying as well. And you're then able to provide maybe angles that even the person examining it would have thought, actually, I did not see that. And that is actually what sets you apart.
Yeah, absolutely.
I wonder how do we create environments where we allow this same space for our teams as well? I mean, like you right now have the luxury of being on a sabbatical and having this real extended time to do this. But I'm just wondering, maybe for someone who's perhaps a fresh grad, an analyst, let's say an analyst in PEMANDU who's just come out of university and they're in the thick of having to do decks, and there's just a lot of work. How do we create an environment where we allow for that space?
The one thing I keep on telling everybody, people working with me, and whether you're fresh graduate or your manager, I always tell them, take time out once in 2 weeks, quietly by yourself in solitude. And what do you do in that hour? Quietly go there, nobody is disturbing you. you reflect on your experience over the last 2 weeks or current affairs. In that hour or 2 hours, you reflect on it. And then based on your experience, plus your reflection time, those two things is going to give you wisdom. You never get wisdom if you don't have the experience, but you don't have reflection. There's a lot of people who have a lot of experience, but they don't have reflection time to think about what were the key learnings that they made from the time they were doing this. To the young graduate, he got a weekend. There's Saturday and Sunday. I'm not asking you to spend 5 hours doing that. I'm just saying 1 hour. And if you the last 2 weeks, he said, well, we did a fantastic piece of work, me and my team on this, and the client are really happy with it. Can I ask the question, why is the client very happy with this? As opposed to the previous week, we had another project with another client, they were most unhappy. Even that reflection time in an hour, that young graduate who was a new analyst with us, he would have been able to come up with the wisdom and say, this is what we did there. That's why it was very good. And if you don't do that, the next time round, you're going to go through an experimental process. You go through the same thing of trial and error, and you repeat the same mistake, and you go and get, no wonder the clients are unhappy. But if you've been able to reflect on 2 clients in the first 2 weeks you've been around, one was good and one was bad, you would have been very quick to analyze the things you did right. The next time you do it with next client, you do that, you're sure you're going to get many 5-star ticks to it. So to my mind, learning is a very important thing. When I say learning, the cornerstone for learning is not just absorbing the material that you learn from a book, nor your experience, but the quality of a reflection. This is the key. And that's why I'm never scared of AI. When people say AI is going to be a problem, these people are people who do not use AI as a starting point. To me, AI, generative AI in particular, like ChatGPT, should be the starting point. You just take the AI and put it there and said, I'm going to do reflection time and further research to improve on it so that my output is 10 times better than ChatGPT.
Yeah, in fact, in PEMANDU Associates, when ChatGPT first started to come out, people were kind of using it in secret.
Yeah.
There was almost this thing of like, I'm using it, but I don't want to admit that I'm using it. But then we actually put out a kind of a framework and a policy on how to use it.
How to use it. I sent a memo, you may recall. I sent a memo to everybody. Don't be scared, embrace AI, and these are the rules of the game. We told people the rules. One of the rules of the game was, if you have an assignment, starting point, as a point of departure, go to ChatGPT and ask the question in ChatGPT as the starting point. And then you then say, now I have this starting point. I now say, what is wrong with this? You look for the flaws in the ChatGPT, but that requires thinking time, reflection time to you to say what's wrong with what is the output. And then we say what is right with the output and what's missing. And then I say how now I can improve the output so that my second measure is, number 1 was guideline as a starting point. Number 2, you do your research and thinking about it, critical thinking, and add it so that your output is 10 times better than ChatGPT. 10 times, That's a starting point. And if you're not 10 times better than ChatGPT, then you're not very good. And the challenge is always to say, how do you add value to it so that it's 10 times better? As a consultant, if you found out that all that you do is providing an advice that is per ChatGPT, I think you'll be found out. And who's going to pay the kind of money? So to my mind, at least 10 times better than ChatGPT in quality, in the data, the research given to it, the robustness of the arguments must be solid. So don't be scared of it. But quality is in the reflection.
Speaking of don't be scared of generative AI, quite interestingly, you showed me two things yesterday, which we both thought were very funny. One was, maybe the first example is not really the product of generative AI, but the second one certainly was. And there have been these images that have been circling around on Facebook.
Or you mean the one that with the police escorting me?
So there's a photo. I'll try to figure out a way to put a picture somewhere on the screen. But it's a picture of you being detained by police. Obviously, it's a deep fake lah.
It's deep fake lah.
And there's a series of these with different different
other
persons of
players.
interest as
Yeah.
well.
I think the
being
headline
pictured.
was some. Now, what do you
What
know?
what will Dato Sri
what
Idris
will-
Jala do next?
Yeah.
Or where is he
and then I
now?
was escorted with my hands behind the back, and the police were escorting me, looking like on the way to jail or something like that.
It's obviously a picture taken from many years ago as well.
yeah.
Far less gray hair. But with things like that and the ease.
There was another one.
Oh, the other one.
There was another one. This one's with Chuang on Do More.
Yes.
And
Kusu Chang's
The
podcast, Do More.
So basically, what they did was they took shots of our video, and they put an entire conversation.
Yes, because you
that
were
has-
on his podcast.
on his
this was maybe
podcast.
last year or
last
something.
year, and they created an entirely fake interview between him and I, and his question was fake, not real, and my answers was nothing to do, and they were trying to sell a platform, how to get rich quickly. I mean, this is incredible. They put it there, and there are so many people
Yeah.
that send it to me because it's circulating in social media.
And what's very deceiving about it is that the supposed news article that is picking up on this story
FMT.
is correct.
Yeah.
Is supposedly Free Malaysia Today.
Yeah, Free
But
Malaysia
then when you
Today.
look at the URL, it's
wrong.
obviously a bogus,
Bogus.
link.
Everything is bogus.
Yeah, but I think that there was the article was something along the lines of Bank Negara is furious with
Yeah.
Dato Sri Idris Jala get rich quick scheme or something
Yeah,
like
yeah.
that, and then they even outlined the supposed conversation between you and Kuzu Chuang in saying something like he asked you, how do you make money, and you said, oh, let me tell you my secret, and it is completely unlike you because I think there was somewhere in there that said something like why work so hard
Yeah.
when you can get rich quick. Let me show you exactly how
and
I
then
do
there's
it.
a platform. If you click this platform, you go straight to the platform where you can pay the money to
Get
use that to
involved in
become
that
rich.
scheme.
It's all a scam.
Yeah.
It's incredible.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
But with the ease of which people can create things like this nowadays, should there be, does that raise questions about maybe additional safeguards
Sure.
that organizations need to have to protect themselves from things like this?
Yeah, I mean, the
Slander.
organizations themselves, they're the ones who put alerts to it. You have regulatory bodies in government like say, MCMC. That's their role as well. If you make alerts, you should alert it to MCMC. By the way, my team has alerted MCMC about it, by the way. And we also have Deepfakes about Tan Sri Jeffrey Chia not too long ago. This time round, they really did a deepfake. They made him in an interview sound like him, and it's actually not him. It was also about how to get rich quick. And it's really incredible. So it's a full interview of Tan Sri Jeffrey Chia on how to get rich quickly, and they the system imitated his voice. This is really incredible. So if you like, the people in Sunway alerted, and I think he went to. So you have to make the alert. Then the regulatory body within their own, they can shut it down, remove those things if it's within there. If it's Facebook, you should alert Facebook as well. I mean, there are all these things, but really in the world where we live in today, you can't prevent all this from happening, but you have to put the alert. The alert is the safeguard to the authorities and the relevant owners of those platforms that can shut down these things.
And I think finally, maybe a closing thought is returning back to the importance of the human interaction and those things that AI and nothing else can do. I think if you spend enough time really working and investing in the relationships that you have with people, ultimately, no matter what fake news might be out there, whatever deep fakes might be out there, I think ultimately our reputation precedes us.
Absolutely.
And that is why it's so important to think about the human aspect. Because if people didn't have that reputation, or if maybe people didn't already have a preconceived notion of you as being a man of integrity, then it would be very easy
For them
to
to
believe
believe.
in stories like that.
Absolutely. I mean, a lot of people are gullible. You don't have reflection time. And you can be confused and you believe all this fake stuff. But people who spend time reflecting, they will be able to distinguish between what is fake and what's genuine. I mean, in a world where AI is there, and data we are full of inundated data. I mean, I think the key question that we have to ask is about future-proofing ourselves and our businesses and our countries in a manner that what is happening in the world, you don't become irrelevant. How do you future-proof businesses and companies? That's a useful conversation to have, don't you think?
Perhaps, maybe that can be a next episode to talk a
Sure.
bit further on this.
Yeah.
But I think that's a good place to wrap up today's conversation. Thanks again, Dad. And thank you all for listening and for watching. We just want to encourage you, if you haven't already, please do subscribe to our channel, either to our YouTube page or to our Spotify. We put up these episodes, these conversations weekly, every Friday at 6 a.m., and we will continue to do so to hopefully bring insight and value to you and your transformational pursuits. So once again, thank you so much for listening. Do subscribe if you haven't already, and we'll see you next week.